This is the new M4 iPad Pro, and this is the new Apple Pencil Pro. And hey, they're pretty good. We've got decent technological advancement, we've got a couple of new features, and look, they're expensive, but hey, you gotta spend some money to make some money, right? And as the dejected second-class citizens that we are, maybe we should just appreciate the scraps that we're thrown every now and then. So when I did an initial review, sort of initial look at the new iPad, this new Pencil Pro, I was kind of nonplussed with it. You know, I could sort of take it or leave it. A lot of people were kind of asking why, right? Because obviously it's better than the last one, etc., etc. And I really think it brings up a couple of interesting questions. For instance, is it worth it? That's fundamentally the first question. The second thing, though, is like, is it any good? We could also ask, could it have been better? But more importantly, I think the real question is, as an artist, how does this sort of bode for a relationship between creatives, between artists, and a company like Apple? As usual for a Drawing Codex video, this is not going to be heavily edited or fast-paced, but I think this is really critical. This topic, this idea, is something that you have to really consider as an artist. These are our tools. This is the thing that really makes a difference. This is what we touch every day as we create. And on the one hand, Apple has, for the first time, really put the word pro with the pencil and combined that idea of artist and pro. It's not just creatives or sort of general creative people, but they've really kind of said that maybe they're committing to having professional artistic tools. But I think this thing specifically, to me, says that perhaps it's going to be a rough ride. Alright, welcome to the Drawing Codex. My name is Tim McBurney. I've been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and on this channel, we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. Now, if you'd like to learn more about illustration and picture making, you can check out my free illustration mini workshop. It charts my journey going from an amateur to a professional, and I talk a lot about really important issues such as how to get more detail and polish in your work, how to plan your images, create thumbnails, and also a few thoughts on how to approach being a professional artist. As I said, it's free. The link will be in the description. Go check it out if that's something you're interested in. So I'm really interested in what you think about this. Do you think this is worth it? Do you think it's good? There's a bit of insight here that I think might be sort of worth sharing and sort of really thinking about, because buying into these ecosystems is a major consideration, and I've been doing this for quite a while. I thought I'd sort of share with you briefly kind of where I'm coming from so that, you know, when you're hearing this kind of advice or these kind of thoughts, it can contextualize it for you. I feel like most of the time I use an iPad as a sort of secondary or sort of tertiary, like third device. It's not my primary workstation. That's sort of the PC that you see there behind you. And a lot of people, I think, you know, in sort of comments and stuff are like, oh, you just don't get it. You know, you're like, you know, too old. You don't understand, you know, the sort of modern mobile sort of lifestyle, etc. And I'd be like, look, maybe, but you know, in sort of 2009, 2010, I read Tim Ferriss's The 4-Hour Workweek. Before being a digital nomad was cool, like I was doing it. I traveled around South America. I drew half my Ara fantasy comic while I was doing it on a 13-inch MacBook Pro and a Wacom tablet in a backpack. I actually used the first iPad Pro that I bought that I think sort of came out around, you know, sort of 2015, 2016, something like that. I bought that the day it came out. I went and got the janky Apple Pencil that, you know, had the little silly USB charger thing. I bought that the first day it could be available. And, you know, I took that on the road too. You know, I sort of went and, you know, actually we were going on a holiday and I kind of said like, hey, I'll do some work on this holiday. Let's, you know, let's stay an extra day and all the stops we're sort of taking in Europe. And, you know, I'll do some work. And that way we can kind of stay for longer, make it a little bit more chill. And, you know, sit by the pool, I'll do some work. And that's literally what I did. So that whole joke of people, the digital nomad thing where people are, you're sitting on a beach working on a laptop, like I've literally done that. I've literally been working as a concept artist in video games on a beach in the south of France, sipping a frickin' drink, right, and actually doing it. I have actually used these things quite a bit, and yeah, I've been using Wacom products and sort of drawing stuff for quite a while, which again, I think is like interesting insight into see how this technology has evolved, because I think the evolution of it is actually the key here. And this thing to me, again, raises a lot of questions. So let's jump in. Why make this video? Why make a video entirely about the Apple Pencil Pro? Well, again, I just really wasn't that interested in this thing. I've never thought these things are that good, and a lot of people have given me a lot of flack for it. And a lot of people are just genuinely like, what are you talking about, dude? Like why are you kind of hating on this thing so much? What's the big deal? And I guess I just wanted to sort of unpack that and talk about the evolution of digital tools and some of where I think sort of it could go, and whether I think this is going to be part of that sort of legacy, essentially. So I think fundamentally it's important to ask the question, is it better? Well, it's better than the last Apple Pencil thing. Obviously, it has a spec bump. It now has haptics, right? You can kind of squeeze it. You can, sort of double tap and you get haptic feedback. It has rotational control. So it is better. But the question is, what is it better than? And I think this is where often, especially if you're in the tech review space or even sort of the artistic gadget space, it's very easy because often we have to sort of talk about the features. That's what everyone's interested in. That's what everyone's asking in the comments. But it's got all these features. And I'm like, yeah, but Apple was very good at selectively benchmarking even things like processors, which are fairly objective in terms of is it faster? And I think this sort of tech attitude, this kind of Silicon Valley tech attitude of we got a spec bump, it's better, you should be happy. I don't know whether that's good. Because I think fundamentally as artists, we adapt to whatever tools we use. And that's why even though the sort of hover sort of feature, right, is something that's kind of interesting, that's been around on Wacom tablets since I started using them in the mid-90s. That's been on Android tablets for a long time before it was on Apple devices. So it's yeah, that's good that it was there, but does it make any difference versus using an M1 iPad where you can't hover? Not really. Why? Because as artists, we adapt to whatever tools we have. And you will learn to use whatever tool you have and get good at it. And I think that's one of the beauties and one of the things that's really good to focus on as an artist, right? To really sort of dig deep and think about, okay, here's what I've got, right? I've got an iPad of some generation. I got this thing. This will draw on this. What can I make? What can I create? And I think that attitude is what I would say embodies the proper artistic attitude, which is that we get the best out of whatever we're given, and some things are better, some things are worse. Now, again, I think the pushback would be, well, this is better, so don't be a Luddite. But the thing is, as I said, better than what? A lot of other products have had this same functionality for a while, and I just don't think it's that much better. It's still limited, I think, by a little bit of this Apple design ethos where we kind of want, and we'll jump into this a little bit more, but I think this is fundamentally the problem is this is marketed as a professional device and it's pro. And I think the problem is this is their art. This thing is Apple's art. This thing it's sleek, right? It's got haptic feedback. It's a marvel of technology. It still kind of sucks to draw with though. It's slippery. It's awkward. Personally for me, when I use the haptics, I have to press quite a bit. Someone did ask in the comments, can you adjust the sensitivity of the haptics? And yes, you can. When I first got this thing, all the features that it said you should be able to have with this thing sort of weren't there in the menus because they needed to update the actual OS. But that happened. You can adjust the sensitivity. But still, you kind of really need to click it like this, right? You need to click like this. You can't sort of click over here and over here and get it to register. So it really requires quite a strong squeeze, even on the lowest sensitivity setting. And yeah, there's just a bunch of stuff where I'm this has never been a great device to draw with, really. It's trying to replicate the feeling of a pencil on something simple, but if you look at most real sort of artists' tools, we often sort of wrap tape and goop around them and kind of make them all sort of custom because that ergonomically is much better. And again, there's limitations for how you can use the haptics depending on how you're holding it, depending on what your grip is. I mean, it's a very limited technology, basically, is what I'm saying. And I think the real key is you can see they're going to have to upgrade this thing because I still don't think it's that good. I still think it's missing major functionality. The rotation is good, but also the rotation kind of makes up for the fact that the tilt sensitivity is not that good. It's not that sensitive to tilt. And what you'd actually find with a lot of older Wacom pens is that the tilt sensitivity was sufficient for you to actually often use sort of particular brushes and sort of get that rotation. You could sort of train, again, you could adapt to your tool, and even without the Wacom rotation pen, you could just use the tilt to get a huge variety of different strokes with a sort of a palette knife, where again, there's a massive difference between the way the pen sort of makes a mark if you sort of drag it horizontally or sort of vertically. So again, like fundamentally, I think the first thing to look at is just, we need to step back from this, like, oh, is it better? The tech lust, the FOMO, like, is this any good? Like, oh, this is much better than the last one, and is it worth it there because of upgrade? And just be like, look, the functionality of a pencil is pretty specific, right? We kind of should be able to figure out how to make a good one of these. People have been making good ones of these for quite a while. The feature set has been set in stone for ages, and the first Apple Pencil just was deficient. The second one was deficient. This one's still deficient. It's better, but like, better than what? Who cares? The second thing I think that's important to look at is that also, as I was hinting at, this is a solvable design brief. And I think this really speaks to kind of how I see this thing being emblematic of the problems that sort of Apple is suffering in a post-Steve Jobs world. Having a good design ethos is part of Apple's history. Steve Jobs famously did put a lot of sort of high-end typography features into macOS, and that really allowed a lot of interesting digital design to happen. And I think it's that ethos of understanding like what people actually need in different industries and the nuances and the sophistication of it that really speaks to the capital D design that I think is really sort of important. And the key is that we've kind of had styluses that have worked, right? Wacom styluses, other sort of derivative style, copycat devices. And, a lot of those features that have worked have been honed over time. We kind of know what a good one of these should be. And the question is like, well, okay, we should replicate that functionality and then we should improve it. There's a lot of stuff here that just seems more like spec bump, where my understanding of how a lot of technology companies function is that they kind of have R&D departments that are developing new features, new technology for pens, styluses, screens, all of these things, new processors, and they kind of have a roadmap that goes out basically as far as they can project. So there are probably R&D features for the next Apple Pencil already in development, and maybe they're holding them back because the tech's just not there. Maybe they're holding them back because they just want you to buy another one in a couple of years. But that kind of attitude of not necessarily kind of looking for like, how do we make the best product, but making it more as like, okay, how can we like spread out the spec bump upgrades over a longer period of time to make sure that people constantly want to buy. And as you see in a lot of the CPU and the graphics card sort of world with this sort of tech attitude to innovation, is that if they don't need to spec bump or give you more to make you to buy, they don't, and they won't, and they don't really care about whether this is enough or whether this is good. It's like not really about that. It's not really about how do we make the best pencil. It's more like, is this enough to make you buy another one? And again, I think that's the thing that's really sort of frustrating, is that we kind of know what a good one of these should be, and I still don't think this is there. The other thing is that there's a lot of hype about technology, and there's a lot of hype put on itself by Apple. And I think you can easily see a lot of simple projections for how you might kind of make some of these things like really good. Like how would you make this better than a pencil? This is the conversation that I just don't know whether is kind of happening over there. And it feels like, again, it's more of that sort of spec bump attitude. But for instance, you can imagine there's a lot of ML, like machine learning, quote unquote AI chips in, these sort of devices, right? This new M4 has more AI stuff in it / machine learning or whatever you want to call it. And again, the fundamental problem is with a lot of haptics is there's this attitude, like with haptics on a MacBook Pro trackpad. It's like, well, let's take out the button, the physical click, because maybe we want to save money or save space or squeeze it, or whatever it is. Let's take out the click that worked, and now we'll give you a haptic click that's not as good. And then we'll spec bump the haptic click because it's kind of a bit rubbish in the beginning. And that means, again, you're kind of back on the road. And so it's like we're taking out clicks and then we sort of give it back to you, but it's deficient. And then you kind of want it to be, back to some sort of mechanical thing. And that's where it's like, I think this has to be better than just like a pencil, right? So how could it be better? Again, it's got haptics, but they're just not that good, right? It's just not that effective. As I said, depending on how you hold it, not giving you full flexibility. But I mean, you can imagine, right? Everyone talks a big game about all this AI and, it's going to be so smart and all this stuff. You could easily imagine that the technology should be possible in an advanced way to like put haptics everywhere, right? The whole thing should be fully haptic. It should be fully sort of pressure sensitive, absolutely everywhere. And then you just should be able to train it via voice and kind of say like, hey Siri, when I hold my pencil this way, can you tell how I'm holding it? And it's like, yes, I can. Why? Because I've got a bunch of AI chips in me. And like, okay, well, when I sort of squeeze it like this, I want you to do this. And when I'm holding it like this, I want you to do this. And I mean, that should all be possible. Why? Because we're in this ultra high technology AI world and it's going to take over everything. I'm like, put sensitivity everywhere and let me control it via AI voice and just kind of, I'll tell it what to do. And then, you think like, oh, okay, well, Apple still hasn't designed a proper interface to take advantage of this. Like, how could this be better than an actual pencil? Well, again, it could have some kind of modern interface that is based on sort of where it is in space. And we kind of know that this should be possible. It should be able to sense kind of where it is in relation to the surface of the iPad. It can kind of do that to a certain degree. It can kind of tell how far it is. It can tell where it is in space. Like, why can't I have a three-dimensional sort of interface for it? And why can't I just code that myself using AI? Like, hey Siri, can you build me a three-dimensional interface where I can, sort of access the eyedropper when I sort of do this? When I do these kind of flicks, right, I want it to do this because this is how I hold a pencil, right? I'm an artist. I don't want to sort of conform to some sort of set of technological guidelines for how this is actually sort of working. And I think that's kind of where it's like, okay, you could potentially see how this could be better than a pencil, but still it's not anywhere near, as good as actually using a real pencil. And it's not as good as using a bunch of other sort of old styluses. So like, what's the point? The point is it's probably better enough to make you, buy this versus the old one. I mean, the other thing is just, look, pencils should be pointier, right? Right, it's just me again. Let me know in the comments down below. I think this thing should be pointier. Most pencils I use are way sharper than this. I don't get why it's so blunt. So the bottom line is, yes, it's better, but I don't think that's enough. And with all the kind of hype and the nonsense that people are talking, the heat people are coming at us with AI and how we're meant to buy this thing because it's got AI in it and that's going to make it better for us. I'm like, okay, like let's make it better. But let's actually try and push this technology forward, because I think until you push it forward, you should at least just match the specifications, which is like physical buttons, make it kind of easy to hold, as Wacom has done. I'll let you sort of adjust the weight, because that's like a fundamental thing that people prefer. Light pencils, heavy pencils, whatever it is. And I think until you can really move it forward, I just don't get why we're sort of getting this thing. And I guess lastly, that really brings me to that relationship with this company and sort of how Apple is sort of faring. And this is important because, again, I've used Apple products for quite a while. Sort of the only official education I have is as graphic design, sort of advertising, and, in those schools. In the 90s, it was all Apple, right? That's what designers used. I grew up in that ethos. I bought a Tangerine iMac like very early on. But mostly I use PCs because they're cheaper and faster, and honestly, I could care less, right? I think the real key here is that these things are tools. As I said, the pencil is a tool, the iPad is a tool. They will all be sort of deprecated. They will all be junk, in 10 years. The first iPad Pro I have, the battery doesn't last that long anymore. It's not really functional anymore. Same with the pencil, right? It was sort of deficient. So these are tools. These are what we use. And I think this is not just a small observation. This is really key to understand that, Steve Jobs said this thing about trucks versus cars, because a lot of people were kind of saying, hey, a lot of these laptops and iPads and devices are kind of getting more consumer friendly. But as they get more consumer friendly, they become less pro. And what's going to happen to people who actually need to design things and make things. And he kind of said this thing where he was like, well, when the first cars were made, every car was a truck because there weren't any sort of fancy roads. And that's who kind of needed trucks. There's the same people who need horses and carts. And as things evolved, you got more consumer-facing cars, but you still have trucks because people still need to do functional things with their cars, like tow a bunch of stuff, transport a bunch of stuff. And he was saying that's the same with tech, which is like, yeah, people are still going to need proper computers, like the one behind me, but most people are just going to want these kind of cars and you know, the iPads and phones and consumer electronics and things like that. And they're not going to need to make things. They're not going to need to do stuff. So it kind of brings us to this, the Pro, right? The Pro moniker. It's a little bit worn out. And it really, to me, again, the fundamental question here is like, is this a genuine truck? Like, is this genuinely a professional tool? Or is it kind of just that top tier with Pro slapped on it, and you're kind of sitting there saying like, now I have to buy that in order to use the latest sort of pencil. Again, I think that ethos of sort of not being quite 100% committed to the way that artists use tools, I think is key. Now, let me know in the comments like how that kind of lands for you, but for me as an artist, I think there's a real disconnect here because, as I said, this is their art. This is Apple's art. And as a consumer, if I buy this, I feel good because it feels, again, like fancy, right? And there's that tech lust, that FOMO attitude, the dopamine, all the nice stuff you get when you get something fancy and nice. But artists make things with tools, and we often get our hands dirty. And I really think it's important as an artist to separate out the tools, the workshop that often is messy, that often is dirty, that produces something that's very finished and polished. And I think it's important to separate those. And I think this is an important aspect for a company like Apple and us as artists to consider, is that I don't think we should be looking for consumer electronics to make our art. We should be looking for the thing that has the most utility and the most functionality. Because the thing that we create that has the shine on it is our art. And we are creators, and we are making things, and we are finishing stuff. But behind closed doors, in our workshops, I don't think we should aspire to have everything kind of shiny and in this kind of Kubrick-esque sort of clean, minimalist thing. And you often see this disconnect for me with when Apple does advertise its professional tools, is you kind of have these rooms full of fake artists in these fake studios doing fake work, and it's just ridiculous. To me, it's like a major disconnect, because again, I've been a professional artist my whole life. I've never done another job. You know, I sort of know that most artists have messy workstations, right? You look at any comic book artist, right? They got a, you know, like it's a messy, ink-stained, chaotic thing with a million pencils everywhere. And every now and then you see someone who's, you know, really good at keeping it clean, but still it's, you know, we get our fingers dirty. And that's part of the process. And I think this is kind of not that to me. And it sort of speaks to a company that is not really connected with the way things are created. And they're always trying to make things sort of polished and finished. Again, let me know how that sort of lands for you. I know a lot of us kind of want to have nice, clean workstations, especially if you have them on camera, right? And a lot of sort of YouTubers, there's a real desire to like make these things fancy and kind of feel as if we're kind of portraying this really sort of clean, professional kind of look. And, you know, like some people maybe are sort of good at that. That's never been my experience. Like, you know, I know a lot of artists who make a lot of really sort of finished products, and often their studios are it's just an office room. It's just a room somewhere. It's full of stuff. It's kind of dusty. It's dirty. The tools they're using are old, but they make good things because it's not about how fancy the tools are. It's how well you use them, how you adapt to them. And often that is through experience, through being able to use a tool, not just for a year, not just for 2 years, but for years, for a decade, to really understand how it works. And I think what you'll find is if you dedicate yourself to that, you're probably going to be in a much better space to worry less about technology and more about what you can do with the tools that you do have. So anyway, those are my thoughts on it. You know, let me know what you think down below. The real thing for me, I guess, is that this isn't capital D design. This isn't a company like Herman Miller and the people who, you know, designed this. Is the Aeron chair that I'm sitting on that I've had for 20 years. This is not a company that seems to be, really thinking about what's the use case. Okay, we need to have a chair that actually supports humans and looks at ergonomics, and they actually ask a chiropractor, like what would be a good chair to make for a human being. And really sort of consider like what's the ideal outcome, and to not stop until you find a product and build a product that actually does a job, that fulfills a brief and actually moves the world forward. This is the capital D design that I sort of grew up reading about and sort of really, aspired to understand that, that's what design should be. And if you kind of look at, a lot of this sort of doesn't seem to be like that. This Apple Pencil seems to be a little bit different. And it's not like there's any excuses. Apple is known for its design. They are known for catering to creatives, to artists. That's kind of part of their like original DNA. They have, if anyone can do it, they can. They have the technology, they have the talent, they have the funding. I'm sure they're working on these things right now. But the real question is this capital D design? Is this actually, good, right? Is it actually a good product that's well designed for us artists to use? Or is it simply just a Silicon Valley tech bump hellscape? Let me know what you think.